You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Podcast Network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Look around. You can find cars like these on AutoTrader, like that car riding your tail. Or if you're tailgating right now, all those cars doubling as kitchens and living rooms are on AutoTrader too. Are you working out and listening to this ad at the same time? Well, multitasking pro, cars like the ones in the gym parking lot are for sale on AutoTrader. New cars, used cars, electric cars, maybe even flying cars. Okay, no flying cars, but as soon as they get invented, they'll be on AutoTrader. Just you wait. AutoTrader.
You're listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Learn more at wearelibertarians.com. We are supported by listeners like you. Donate per month or make a one-time donation through PayPal or Patreon at wearelibertarians.com. Join in on the conversation. Visit the sidebar at wearelibertarians.com and join our Facebook group, meet other listeners, and get our daily news dump.
The Boss Hog of Liberty podcast is the latest hit on the We Are Libertarians Network. Each week, Jeremiah Morrill and Dakota Davis explore life in Henry County, Indiana.
It's a show about our circle of friends, public officials, and our experiences. 80% observation, life, humor, and 20% politics. Boss Hog of Liberty is the day-to-day happenings of Henry County, Indiana, which is just like your community. Add us on iTunes and sample us today.
Dear Leader would want you to.
The Johnny Rocket Launchpad is Liberty. Each week we strive to bring you the best guests in talk radio. The Johnny Rocket Launchpad delivers weekly interviews of noteworthy politicians, experts, and activists. The Johnny Rocket Launchpad is bringing the party to the Libertarian Party and launching ideas in your direction. Check us out at johnnyrocketlaunchpad.com. You can hear me, Kurt Nelson, and the beautiful Heather Nixon talk about the ideas of liberty, rock and roll.
Hey guys, this is Roger Paxton, and if you're fed up with the government running every single aspect of your life, but you're not listening to the Lava Flow podcast yet, then what's wrong with you? Check us out at thelavaflow.com, or just go back to sucking up to the government. The Lava Flow podcast, striking the root every single episode.
It's time to shake up your podcast feed, folks, by subscribing to Lions of Liberty, the only libertarian variety show out there. Spend Mondays with me, Mark Claire, as I feature in-depth interviews with great names in the libertarian community and fun roundtable discussions.
Electric Liberty Land with me, Brian McWilliams, every Wednesday, your weekly dose of comedy, culture, and liberty.
And Felony Fridays with me, John Odermatt, where I expose injustice in the broken criminal justice system.
Find us on iTunes, Stitcher, and at lionsofliberty.com.
Welcome to We Are Libertarians. I'm your host, Chris Spangle. We bring you all of the irreverence modern politics deserves while putting people before political parties. We examine current events from a libertarian perspective with the goal of leaving you better informed. Please be sure to rate and review us on iTunes, like us on Facebook, and subscribe at Patreon at wearelibertarians.com. In exchange for supporting our program, we give you all kinds of bonus content and free stuff. This show is crowdsourced, so you can send us news with the hashtag WALNews or in our Facebook group and our Discord channel, all of which you can find at wearelibertarians.com. We are always taking your questions and comments via email at editor@wearelibertarians.com. Please be warned that the show is raw, unedited, and authentic, so the language is sometimes strong and offensive. In this show, we're going to talk about what it's like to serve as an active duty military person. And we're going to talk a little bit about Facebook, Google, Twitter, and everything that's happening on those platforms. And joining me for this episode, we're on a remote broadcast. We're not back at the Wall compound. We're at DK New Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis with my good friend Doug Karr. Doug, how are you doing?
I love having you out here.
Yeah, it's so much fun to talk to Doug. Doug's one of the preeminent digital marketing guys in the entire country.
Oh, jeez.
I know.
Setting expectations high there.
Real high. And then
up in my rates right now.
And also joining us is George, and George is not his real name, and we're not live streaming tonight just so we can protect George's identity because of various reasons. But to protect his identity means you're going to get more accurate information. So to all of my Patreon subscribers at $10 a month and up, please forgive me that we're not live streaming. I'm sure it will be worth it. So a lot of pressure on you, George.
Apparently.
No, you've been I met you almost a year ago at the state convention.
Yeah, the state convention. I saved an open seat at my table, just waited for you to walk in. You happened to.
Nice.
And I sat down, and he goes, "Hi, I'm George. I've listened to every single one of your episodes in the last 4 months, and then your wife wanted to murder me when she found out who I was because I've heard your voice more than I've heard his voice the last 4 months."
That's pretty much right. Whenever I find a podcast I like, I start at episode 1 and I just go. Right. I did it with Freakonomics, The Fifth Column, and then also with Wall.
That's commitment.
That is commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you've got a couple podcasts, Doug.
It's growing in numbers. Yeah, I've got like 5 now, so it's getting ridiculous.
5 podcasts.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool, though.
It is cool. I think it's finally great to see the medium kind of take over. And by the way, I mean you're way before I was getting into this, and everybody should know that Chris has been a resource for me, and Brad Shoemaker in town, and Jen Eads, and people that have been podcasting for 10 years. I probably started 5 years ago with a kitty site, to record me. And so I'm addicted now.
Yeah, he's got the Shure microphone. I have a Shure 7MB, Shure 7B,
SM7B,
SM7. Thank you. And then everybody else has the smaller microphones. But you've got like 6 of the nice microphones. You've got a professional studio with cameras and
we're getting there. We've got
nice.
We've even got a multi-camera live setup now using a company called Switcher Studio, which is pretty awesome. So yeah, we can, and we're starting to get in LED lighting because the lighting in here is really crappy. So yeah, we're getting there.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean, it's amazing. Somebody who's into digital marketing, where do you think podcasting fits in the future? I mean, I can tell you, we've talked about this on your show actually, but like to me, radio has always been the most intimate.
Yeah,
podcasting, I think, has a bright future ahead of it.
I do too. I feel like it's I think a lot of people look at podcasting somewhere between text and video, and I think that's a really a terrible way of looking at it. And the reason why is because video has to paint the picture for you, and so you see the story through somebody else's eyes. Whereas podcasting, you're listening, and you can hear people's passion, but you get to paint the picture yourself. Right. And I think that's that's really powerful. If you're a good storyteller or a good interviewer, there's nothing like just kind of sitting there with your eyes closed and listening to a podcast, and painting that picture yourself.
George, why do you like podcasts?
Well, it's easier to listen to than watching a video or trying to stream YouTube. I can download them at home and then listen to them while I drive. I like to keep my mind really actively engaged. I'm not a big music person, and so podcast is a perfect fit for that.
Yeah.
Especially with anything political or religious based, I play them all the time. Sometimes my kids complain about it on the way to school and daycare because they're 5 and 2, and so they're a little bit boring for them. So I'll toss my other phone in the back and let them listen to Pandora.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I'm a mental creature too, and so for me, those active moments, like yesterday, I cleaned my entire house, and I had podcasts on the whole day, and I was listening to a variety of different kinds of shows, different types of topics, and it's great because, in radio, and I think I talked about this in the last episode, my broadcasting background, it's quick. Like the beat in my head is because you've got 30 seconds to get your point out before you've got to go to somebody else. It's like you listen to Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan, like, this is how this is kind of how Joe Rogan does an interview. Yeah. And what do you think about that? And it's much slower and it's much more deliberate.
What's the Dan's history?
Dan Hardcore History.
Yeah,
works of art.
I have to put it at 2x. I mean, the guy is so slow.
Those are works of art.
They are.
The Genghis Khan one. I just recommended that. I mean, just listen to it. It's so good.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the beauty of podcasts, is that you can engage your mind while you're doing other things.
Exactly.
And you get to, you just don't, we could sit here for 30 minutes or 2 hours, and we can have, as long as the conversation flows and the information is interesting. It's so great to have this platform. I mean, it's what I love, and it's exactly what I think the world needs right now, which is
I agree.
That conversation that has complexity to it.
Well, I know we're going to talk about social media, but text, you lose the passion, you lose. I'm sarcastic as hell, so people might take that as anger or mean,
right?
And whereas when you're actually having a conversation, people can hear in your voice whether you're stressed, upset, sarcastic, joking, whatever it is, and you can't sit. An LOL could mean a lot of things. It could mean I'm talking down to you,
right?
Or it could mean that it was funny, or I'm sarcastic, or and so voice is just incredibly powerful.
Well, you're really at the mercy of the other person's perceptions too.
Yeah.
Like, I by nature am a sensitive person, and so I'll a lot of times take a comment as an attack.
Wait a second, you're a podcaster and a libertarian, and you're sensitive?
Yeah.
How does this work?
I joked today that I'm going to go vegan keto too, and CrossFit. Maybe society will accept it. No, so like online, a lot of times I will take stuff that I just like, they didn't intend it to be a slam, but like if I'm in a particularly insecure mood that day, I will take it a certain way, and I think that happens all the time online. I don't think I'm unique in that way. I think it just is. It's the way that the platform works, the way the written word, that back and forth, where it's just. I mean, Doug. There's a lot of conversation around social media with the psychology of social media and the psychology of Facebook and Twitter. I mean, can you kind of explain what that conversation is about right now?
I just wrote about it recently. I just read a book that was really fascinating. It was on public shaming, and it was sincerely just a great read. I was down at a conference and somebody recommended it to me, and I actually listen to podcasts a lot more than I read now. But this is a book that I picked up, and I just couldn't put it back down. And part of the problem that we have right now is, especially with social shaming. So whether it's social justice or whether it's right now, everything is sexual harassment, and that's exploding online. The problem is that we're reaching an age where everybody's dark secrets are getting revealed, and we're dark people. We all have. I've said things to my daughter that I'm ashamed that I've said to her in anger or whatever. If there was a microphone on, or if she posted that to Facebook, I would probably go viral.
Well, Mel Gibson was a great example of that.
Absolutely. And so the problem that I see right now is that we have these stampedes online, and we have these stampedes, and there's not a happy ending to it. These people in the book, the public shaming book, these people literally lose their livelihoods. They don't get hired again because every recruiter is Googling their name. One lady even, she couldn't even get a date again.
Jeannie Ann Sacco, you're talking about So You've Been Publicly Shamed by John Ronson.
Yes.
Which is a book we talked about a little bit last week, which, I mean, she's the woman who flew to South Africa, made the joke about AIDS, got off the plane, and her life has never been the same.
Yeah, exactly. And the problem is that, I mean, I'll fully admit it here. Of course I've made jokes about AIDS. You know what I mean? In the comfort of friends, in a safe area, and not with the intent to be mean or anything else. And that's the problem is that these things take fire, and the stampede goes, and then the record is there forever.
Yeah.
And so as a people, I really feel like we're going to have to learn that there isn't good people and bad people in the world. There's people at all levels in between. And you can be a bad person and go to jail and redeem yourself and feel sorry and someday become a really great person.
Right.
And you can be a great person that made a mistake one day and did something absolutely terrible or said something absolutely terrible. And as a people, we need to stop pointing our fingers at those people and wanting to shame them forever when, after we're done shaming, we go back and, somebody's, hitting their kid or doing something just as terrible or worse. And so the psychology of social media is really starting to scare me. I mean, we've been friends online for about a year now or something like that?
Oh, and for probably almost 10.
Oh, really?
You're
Okay.
somebody that I was watching your work as a marketer when I was at the Libertarian Party of Indiana 10 years ago.
So you know that I'm absolutely transparent. You
Right,
know, I put it
yeah.
out there. But I'll tell you, the last few years, I've cut back. You don't
Mm-hmm.
see a lot of political arguments from me online. You don't see a lot. And the reason why is not because I don't want to change people's minds and open them up to new ideas or even debate them, which I love doing. It's because of this aspect of my livelihood is at stake.
Yeah.
That literally, I know of at least one client that I worked with him with 3 different companies. We got in an argument about the Second Amendment, and I never heard from him again. You know, and we say hi and hello, and online, but he's not calling my business anymore. So, wow, right?
Yeah, I mean,
that's a terrible, terrible world we're living in where we can't respect each other's differences.
Go ahead.
Especially when a lot of this stuff, comments that people made or actions they took during like 18 to 22, and then 15 years later, it gets brought back up and haunts them.
Right.
It's like, wait a second. When you're 22, you're not even the same person once you turn 30.
Yeah.
When I look at myself when I was 21, 22, I'm almost unrecognizable.
Exactly.
And so to still try and use something that happened that long ago to destroy somebody,
right,
it's just unbelievable.
And it does. I mean, a Google result is a Google result. It's as fresh as the day that it first took place. So it's and so I'm modifying my behavior online, and I think a lot of people should probably do the same thing.
You look at somebody like Dakota from the Boss Hog of Liberty, who's 21, who you go back on his Facebook page to when he was 12. And then he's going to, in 10 years, be a completely different. There's 3 versions of himself online.
Yeah.
And the things that you're trying to work out and like myself, I'm a verbal processor. So like I like to talk, and I like to talk with friends, and Messenger's an easy way to do it. And it's already happened once. It happened a month ago. Somebody who's been in a group chat that I considered a friend, that you're making jokes to try and make your friends laugh, takes the screenshots, put it out of context, and then puts it in a Facebook group to make you look bad.
Context and intent are the 2 things that are totally missing from these.
Completely.
Yeah, I just saw, today, I can't stand the guy, but Al Franken is on the hot seat today.
Yeah.
Right? And it's because there's a photo of him grabbing a girl's boobs.
Grabbing is a strong word.
Yeah,
like here's the thing. Like
yeah.
It's so Jamie Kilstein. I've recommended this podcast in every one of mine since I've heard it. Jamie Kilstein was the guy who was a progressive, male feminist, liberal podcast host who did Citizen Radio, who went on Joe Rogan's podcast and talked about how a Jezebel article ruined his entire life and career, and most of it was false. And
yes.
But he talks about what a dirtbag he was to wake up every day and go on Twitter looking with the mob to destroy the next person.
Well, that's my point. Like
Yeah.
Al Franken, as much as I can't stand him, he was on a comedy tour with other comedians making jokes.
Yeah, so
he wasn't in the senator's office.
Right.
Now he's made his bed and needs to lie in it. He's yelling just like everybody else that nobody that has bad behavior deserves to be a senator. Okay, well, here you go. You're doing it to everybody else. Now you got to eat your own dog food,
Right.
But it's still taken out of context, and the intent was totally different.
Yeah, so Leanne Tweeden, who is on McIntyre in the Morning, a radio show, and former FHM Maxim model, very pretty woman. She was a sports reporter at the time on a USO tour with Al Franken, and they were doing a skit, and he wrote a part in the skit where he kissed her, and backstage he basically forced a kiss on her when she kept saying, "No, I don't want to kiss you." Held the back of her head and forced a kiss on her. That absolutely is out of bounds and inappropriate. Totally wrong. Her boyfriend, now husband, was on the tour with them. He was in the military. Then there was a photo that she posted on this article where it appears he's grabbing her breast, her breastular area, and
breastplate.
But she's wearing a protective vest, and there's a shadow behind the hand. Like it's very clear that he does not he's.
Oh, it's absolutely clear, but
you can't tell if he's touching her or not.
Even if he's not touching her, the objectivity of it, right?
Right.
Treating a woman like an object
Absolutely.
is clear in it.
Absolutely.
And so, and that's why I say, like, Al, hey, you know what? You're the one screaming the loudest about this stuff.
About the Roy Moore stuff, calling on a yeah.
And Roy Moore, I think, is a little bit different and intense and everything else.
Insane.
But
yeah, there's no moral equivalency between the two.
Yeah,
No, not at all.
But if you're going to say it's black and white, well, you're
Right.
on the black side of this one.
Why wait to see if you'll get something you like this Valentine's Day when you can go to BlueNile.com and find something you'll love? Whether you're looking to treat yourself to a little winter sparkle or show a galentine how much you appreciate them, Blue Nile offers a wide selection of high-quality designs, expert guidance, and free 30-day returns for the ultimate peace of mind. You can even design your own jewelry. Right now, save up to 50% at BlueNile.com. That's BlueNile.com.
You know.
So my problem with the Franken, like, I don't think Roy Moore or Al Franken should be in the Senate because of politics. But
I agree.
there isn't, what Roy Moore did was reprehensible. Like, there's just no defending it. And I as I said in the last episode, like, everybody has this flat thinking online, and there's no complexity to it. So, like, when Al Franken came up today, it's like, all right, stop. Put your biases aside. Yes, you don't like him.
Yeah.
And let's look at this from a rational point of view. What he did was wrong. Should he be fired over it? Well, I mean, to get rid of a Democratic senator, I'll do anything to fire him, I guess. You know what I mean? Like, but because of politics. But at the end of the day, like, it's not the same. The right is treating it as if he's the left's Roy Moore, and it's not the. It's
totally
not
agree.
the same. And people, it's just like red meat, and people have completely left their critical thinking at the door online in the Trump era, and it's now just left or right. It's total.
That's it.
Black and white
pick
thinking.
a side, right?
Right.
The thing is, you can say both are wrong.
Right.
That's the thing that's interesting to me is, like, nobody's like, I even commented to you because we went back and forth on it, and I said, look, I really don't give a crap if Roy Moore gets kicked out or doesn't get kicked out or whatever. I think, you're a sicko if you were dating 14-year-olds. I don't care if it was 40 years ago. It's really kind of weird, you know? But I also am absolutely just as scared of a media outlet sitting on a story, or I mean, the timing of it is just perfect. And they knew it was perfect. They knew, and that's scary to me too, is allegations, binders of women with Mitt Romney, right? I don't think Mitt Romney, I don't even know if, he ever took his second set of Mormon underwear off to think about a woman.
He probably was, right? He's probably one of the most honorable men to ever run for the office. Exactly.
And so, but they did a perfectly timed allegation, which embarrassed him. And I'm just getting tired of that. That's my thing is, so that's where I say both sides can be wrong. Is I'm absolutely, if this guy's a nasty like that, good, shoot him, put him in jail. I don't care. But at the same time, we also have to be careful of the setup is just seems to be every single elected official. The setup, whether they're conservative or libertarian, is okay. 30 days before the election, we're going to have the story run that they're a sexist, or they've harassed people or whatever. And I'm growing weary of it. And I think that's what's happening is people are beyond me and growing, and they're to a point where they're just saying, oh, well, this is a setup. It's all fake.
It's not like any of this is new. I mean, you have Bob Packwood in 92 eventually getting kicked out in 95, which Bob Packwood, you're old enough to remember Bob Packwood. I was a youngin'. I was in third grade when it came out, but I was politically aware enough to remember how big of a deal it was that the senator got accused, Oregon senator, Republican, got accused by 10 women. I think he was a Republican. And then, Bill Clinton was Bob Packwood was a big deal because it was it just was so morally incomprehensible to the greatest generation that somebody would act like that.
Not only that, but they were, there was a strong Christian right at the time, which was pushing their moral superiority. And so in
the light of Clinton,
they were higher on the ladder. They had a longer distance to fall.
Yeah,
and with Clinton, I thought the Clinton-Lewinsky thing was probably the biggest mistake that the Republicans have literally made in politics, because it was like an alligator.
It was a Pandora's box.
Yeah, they knew it was personal, and they didn't care. They lost elections afterwards. They didn't care. It was all about being vindictive. Was the guy a creepo? Yes, he absolutely was. But there was no reason to publicly, again, we're back to the shaming, publicly shame and embarrass him, for something that, if it was ongoing behavior, do an investigation, kick him out of office, lock him up, do whatever. But in this case, it was so publicly vindictive. That's all. It was just meant to shame.
Well, and now the left's hypocrisy after all those years. I mean, Chelsea Handler tweeted out something along the lines of, wouldn't it be nice if people would believe an accuser? And Juanita Broderick tweeted back, yes, it would be.
Oh, there's somebody did a beautiful tweet. It was amazing.
There's somebody who's very credible and that the left never took seriously. And now it's a scary time, because everybody is one tweet away from every single person has done something. I mean, we're kind of in a panopticon. Like, if you know what a panopticon is, it's when it was this puritanical American jail, I think in Pennsylvania, where basically it was a circle, and inside, on the outside of the circle, you had like these little windows where it was like a two-way mirror, and the prisoners never knew if they were being watched or not. But the idea that they were constantly being watched made most of the people in there insane, and it was ruled unjust and cruel and unusual, and so it was shut down. But like, we're really in a panopticon. Our society's become a digital panopticon.
No, I agree.
It's very scary.
I had my business partner was female, Jen Lisak. She owns Sapphire Strategy now, and our joke at the office was that one day she would own the business from the sexual harassment lawsuit. And there was nobody that I had greater love and respect for than Jen. But when the jokes flew, Right. And were they off color? Yes, they were off color. But Jen, in her heart, knew that if someone would have come in here again with intent or contextually, put her down because she was a woman, I would have been the first person to punch that person in the face, because she was someone that I looked up to, not looked over at, looked up to. And that's the thing, is you can have these, we can have bad behavior and still be good people.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that Vox released an article a couple days ago that they wanted to relook Bill Clinton's accusations. Mm-hmm. The sexual harassment ones, the sexual assault ones, Monica Lewinsky, that they're saying, well, maybe we should relook these. And it's like, no, wait a second. You're waiting until all this is going on, and then you're going to sneak in this article of, oh, maybe Bill Clinton's a bad guy. We've known he's been a bad guy for a long time. And a year ago, during the election, when Hillary Clinton was running, you guys didn't want anything to do with any stories like that.
That's I think where the right does have a edge, is if you're going to sit here and criticize every single Republican for being sexist and down on women and everything else, but then Hollywood is raping women, and well, guess what? Yeah, we're going to make a big deal out of it. I don't blame the right for doing that. But to your point, look, there's bad behavior everywhere, but you really have to take a look at and engage these people on a personal level and see whether, is this something that they truly are? Weinstein is a monster, right?
No doubt.
We know that,
right?
And he deserves to be in jail. But does, I don't even know another example, to Al Franken, is Al Franken a monster? Or was the context that he was making a joke at the time and on tour and everything else? We need to be reasonable people, because we all fall short.
Yeah, and that's why I look at our own Facebook page, with the We Are Libertarians main Facebook page, and my personal Facebook page, which you can find all of at wearelibertarians.com. Like I just see
it's just black and white, right?
I just see libertarians where we're supposed to be the deeper thinkers. We're supposed to have more compassion. We're supposed to not buy into bipolar thinking where it's one or the other. And there's just so many libertarians that are not using the brains that God gave them to really think about this stuff critically. And I think there's also a strain of libertarians that want to win at any costs, and they're more in the Republican Party because Libertarian Party people don't win. And we really talked about it a lot in depth last episode. There's two types of ways to think about this stuff. I don't care if it's like some writer basically said, during the Lewinsky stuff, I don't care what Bill did with Lewinsky. I'll blow him as long as he doesn't implement abortion.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what the politicians do. It doesn't matter what their moral character is as long as they vote the right way.
Right.
Versus character matters.
It's the greater
in society.
good, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And so I have always taken the view that character matters, and that I'm involved in politics because I want to build a better, more moral, more fair society, and you can only do that if you're a principled person.
Yeah.
And yes, you're going to fall short. Nobody's perfect. I mean, I've outlined my flaws on this show plenty of times. There's no reason to give up your soul for Roy Moore. So I don't understand it. But
I think reasonable people think that way. But I'll go back to I love calling it a stampede because that's what it is. Right? Is when everybody's running in a certain direction, screaming. You don't stop to ask for the facts and the context and the intent. You start running and screaming too. Yeah. And that's what happens online right now, and that's what happens with voters right now. If voters were reasonably intellectual, we would have good leaders. I got in an argument with Jeb Banner. He's an amazing guy, really a great guy, and he's on the left, and he knows that I fall, I don't know where I am, but right in some ways and libertarian in others. And I he was really, really just ashamed of, Donald Trump as a president. Mm-hmm. And my point was he's a perfect reflection of what America looks like right now.
Yeah.
Look at a Donald Trump tweet, which I laugh at most of them, but then look at the responses of higher up reasonable leaders in this country, and their behavior is just as juvenile in response. And I go, I don't see a difference. Nobody's taking the higher road.
We've somehow fooled ourselves to think that, because we have cars and the internet, that we aren't the same people who... I'm reading a book by David Hackett Fisher about Paul Revere, a great book called Paul Revere's Ride. And they talked about Boston in the early 1700s, and, as you entered Boston's gates, the first thing you saw into this puritanical hamlet was the stocks and a noose and bones and a rusted cage with the bones of a slave in it. We seem to think that somehow we're not the same human beings, the same animals deep down that enjoyed going to watch a hanging in 1850. Yeah. We're not that much more evolved, guys. The Better Angels of Our Nature by Pinkett, talking about the decline in violence and why it's happening. That's all still well and good, but we still are the same complex animals of hierarchy. And I think part of what happens, you look at Kevin Spacey. Everybody looked at the Kevin Spacey story and went, "That's wrong."
Yeah.
And the Kevin Spacey story is the exact same as the Roy Moore story.
Yeah.
But because the element of politics was involved in it, a politicization happened where half the aisle went, "Well, we're not going to defend him, but hold on a minute there, I'm going to defend him." And the other half, "I'm not going to read the neither side seemed to read the article. And if you read the article, it's pretty clear, this is gross and as bad as Kevin Spacey, if you're thinking in moral terms. But if you're looking at it in political terms, well, then you're David Horowitz, where I don't care if he raped kids, he's not going to vote for abortion.
Yeah.
So who cares what the moral of the person is, which is so bizarre a bizarre argument for the right to make based on the last 30 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, and during the 2016 election, I engaged specifically 3 different evangelical Christians who were planning on voting for Trump. I talked my dad out of voting for Trump twice because he was not wanting to, but was going to just out of a vote against Hillary. When I explained, and to the other 2 as well, but it didn't work. is when you walk into that ballot box, there's not an option of not Hillary. When you press that button, it is, I support Donald Trump.
Right.
And with that comes everything with Trump.
Yeah.
I disagree.
All right.
And I would also tell them that a vote for Donald Trump says that we don't care about character, we care about politics.
Right.
No, I disagree, and I respectfully, but there is the lesser evil, and this is absolutely, I got to speak at the Libertarian Party recently, and this is a problem that I see with libertarians, and honestly, I'm just being honest. And I'm not saying it's a flaw. It's a difference in my thinking and libertarians is that libertarians are genuinely righteous. I think good, like you said, they evaluate things logically and everything else. When the country is sliding into mayhem and death and destruction, I'm just not going to help accelerate it. If I can slow it down, still heading in the wrong direction, I'm going to try to slow it down, even if it's still heading in the wrong direction. And that's my personal thing. So I did vote for Donald Trump, not wanting Donald Trump as president, but not wanting the acceleration that I was seeing that was going to come with Hillary Clinton.
And what was the value choice that you made?
So I voted for Gary Johnson. My dad wouldn't support Gary Johnson because of abortion, but he voted for the Constitution candidate, Darrell Castle, I believe.
Yeah, Darrell Castle.
And so he one of the things that, as we talked about it, is that, the lesser of two evils is still evil.
Yes.
And a vote communicates something. So as off-party, minor party candidates gain votes, that communicates to the major parties those choices are not acceptable. And so even if we knew Gary Johnson was not going to win the election, those votes communicated to the Republican and Democratic parties, your candidates are unacceptable. And so I even supported that, as long as we continue to vote for the lesser of two evils, we're only going to have two evil choices.
Yeah.
Right.
But I look at it and I go, those are the only choices we had, right? That's I don't disagree with you, and the thing is, I totally respect that. I absolutely respect that. I just have a different take on it.
So I'm trying to look up who the Libertarian, because there is a Libertarian candidate in the Alabama race, and I would be remiss as a reporter on the Libertarian movement if I didn't mention Ron Bishop, who is a write-in candidate. He's an IT professional who lives in Irondale. He declared himself as a write-in on September 30th. And he says, the two choices that we have now don't conform to what I think America needs to be. I'm hoping to give voters a third option. Bishop is 50, making his second run for office, running as a county commissioner. And the way it's kind of going right now, everybody's getting out and voting. They're not voting for the establishment. They're voting for your typical politicians. And these guys are definitely politicians. So Ron Bishop, and there's a meme floating around with this guy, and I didn't post the meme because I don't like the meme because it's like under the sexual assault, like it's like a chart of the three, and under sexual assault for Doug Jones, the Democrat, they put a question mark. And I just felt like that was unfair, and so like even memes that I feel are unfair I won't share. But yeah, I think it is. And that's like, if you've heard taxation is theft, if you go to wearelibertarians.com and you look up the path to libertarianism, that is something that I put together several years ago, which I think is just a very quick guide to the basic foundational principles of what libertarians believe. These three big ideas that, with some videos and text that kind of walk you through the basics in a different way that you're not going to hear in other places, because it talks about moral evaluations as opposed to I'm against government.
Yeah.
And I think in so many ways, the libertarian movement have gotten so obsessed with the government being the ills, the root of all evil, that they've forgotten the other wing of the airplane, which is you have to be a good person to live in a libertarian society.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, there's going to be bad actors, but we have to value giving. We have to value charity. We have to value all these different good qualities So we can sit here and say on our moral high horse, like government steals, but you should talk about the positive principles instead of just taxation as theft. Like, it really comes down to what are your personal values. Like, I would never, Doug has a very nice iPhone case. I would never steal his iPhone case because I like it.
Right.
It's not fair for me to ask George to steal Doug's iPhone case. It's not right for all the people in this building to vote on me taking Doug's iPhone case. Yeah. So, like, if it's not right on an interpersonal basis, then it's not right on a societal basis. That doesn't reflect my personal values, and that's why I support moving society in a libertarian direction. So I certainly see your point of view, Doug, where you go, listen, we can't have Hillary Clinton. And in some ways, you're absolutely right. Like, if you had Hillary Clinton in office during the Texas shooting, she would have used that moment to further move this country towards confiscation of guns and eroding the Second Amendment. But I think George's point is also valid in that you can't build a libertarian society and move us towards a libertarian society without some base level of morals. Yeah. And that's what I think society is grappling with right now. I do think that there are people who just want to use it for political purposes because it feels good. It feels good when you open up your Twitter and you've got 72 likes on a tweet that's against a politician, and it's like cheap heat. Like, it's like there's a wrestling concept called cheap heat, where basically you walk out. It's not because you made a great slam. It's not because you were good on mic work. It's that you walked out and you're like, how great is New York City? Ah! Like, that's cheap heat.
Yeah.
And there's so many people who just, like, politics is easy cheap heat to get likes. And every time you get those likes, it's that serotonin hit in your brain. And it gets addicting. And I'll tell you, like, I'm really trying hard to put my phone down and not get on social media and unfollow my posts. And
same here.
Then go back and thoughtfully respond to things.
I see a shooting and I wait 3 days.
Yeah.
I just go away because I don't want to be part of that stampede.
It's like I didn't even post. I think Wall posted about Al Franken. Yeah. But I didn't personally post because it's just like, you know what, after the Roy Moore thing, I had so many people, like, I lost respect for so many friends. I unfriended like half a dozen people. Like, I just don't want to do it.
Thanks for not unfriending.
Yeah, I didn't unfriend you. I don't want to, I know you're shit posting. Like, I know already that Doug Karr is shit posting.
You actually brought up a good point that I want to kind of parallel to you on that, and that's that I was on another podcast and I was just talking about this because the same thing happens with business versus government, right? And that's that we sit there and we say, why is government in charge of healthcare? Why healthcare sucks? This is ridiculous. This is unconstitutional. Everything else, but at the same time, employers are cutting employee hours down to 28 so that they can get by with not giving them benefits. They've cut we used to have when I worked at the shipyards when I got out of the Navy, whoa, wow, that was a long time ago. But we had a hospital in the shipyards. Like, I could bring my family during work hours, and go get my family treated for free in there, and that was just part of the benefit, of working at the shipyards. And I look at, I think that we've done the same thing on the corporate side of it, that we sit there and we scream and we yell about government wanting to take more taxes, but at the same time, we're not willing to sacrifice, some of our profit, to take care of our children, or to take care of the families that are working there.
Right.
And I think it's a very similar thing that, okay, if in a libertarian society, if you truly want government to stay out of all of this stuff, that means that you absolutely have to step up.
Right.
And people just, people reject that wholeheartedly. It's personal responsibility. No,
for the other guy.
Yeah, for the other guy, And so I love that you said that because I very much feel the same way that I have a responsibility as a business owner to be taking care of the people around me. A responsibility, not governed by law or anything like that, but just a human responsibility to take care of the people around me and make it a better place.
Right.
Yeah, and so my 5-year-old goes to a private school that its entrance is based on a variety of different factors. Race is one of them, but income level is another. and they tier their tuition accordingly. And so, in effect, those that make more subsidize the tuition for those that don't. And I was explaining that, and so we pay about $10,000 a year for him to go to this school. And so I was explaining this to a work colleague today, and he made a joke about socialism. I said, but here's the thing, and he outranks me too, but that was fine because I was willing to engage him on this. I said, here's the thing, we're choosing it.
Exactly.
It's not coerced.
Exactly.
Socialism is if somebody made me do it.
Right.
But we like the school. We like the environment he's in. We like that exposure to people of lower income levels. Where we live is mostly white. And so that's good for him to have that exposure to people that are different, that look different than him, talk different than him. And so we're happy to pay that extra money and support them so that they get a good education.
Yep. Yeah, and this Paul Revere's book, I mean, it goes back to our founding, too. These are basic fundamental principles of our nation's founding. And they talk about how Paul Revere in this town, he was one of the only mechanics, quote-unquote, working men who was allowed in these upper crust, higher society,
Does that mean
groups.
that he was revered?
He was revered, yeah. And... and I want to read this passage because I think it speaks to what we're talking about. We misunderstand Paul Revere's revolutionary thinking if we identify it with our modern ideas of individual freedom and tolerance that later spread through the world. Bostonians had a very different attitude in 1775. Sam Adams often spoke of what he called the public liberty, or the liberty of America, or sometimes the liberty of Boston. Their idea of liberty, both a corporate and an individual possession, it had a double meaning in New England, akin to the Puritan idea of a special and general calling in Cotton Mather's Two Oars. Basically, you can't... oars of a boat. It referred not only to the autonomy of each person's rights, but also the integrity of the group, and especially to the responsibility of a people to regulate their own affairs. We remember the individual rights and forget the collective responsibilities. We tend to interpret Thomas Jefferson's ambiguous reference to the pursuit of happiness as an individual quest. But in 1774, Paul Revere's town meeting spoke of social happiness as its goal. So to achieve equality, to achieve liberty, you have to have a community mindset. And it's not socialism. And libertarians have this knee-jerk reaction against anything that if I read that, I'm sure there's somebody, Spangle's going to become a leftist, or I bet he's just left libertarian.
But it's selfless. It's not
right.
It's saying that I'm not gonna equate and measure other people against myself. I'm just going to give back.
Right.
Period. And I think that's where socialism is the measurement, right? It's you have someone totalitarian, you have something a system over you telling you what's fair. This isn't that. This is saying, you know what, I'm going to give back. If I want to give back 50% of my salary on an annual basis to charity, I can do that. If I want to give 10%, I can do that. But it's selfless, for the better of society.
Well, and that's one thing that angers me about Marxism and communism is that, kind of one of their keynote phrases is from each according to their ability, to each according to their need, which they stole from the book of Acts in Scripture, but they repurposed it to mean forceful.
Right.
Where in Acts, it was voluntary. Oh, I saw that Chris had a need. I had extra food that year, so I gave some to Chris. It was totally voluntary, and that's the difference that seems to get lost on a lot of people.
It's funny, too, when you go back on all the verbiage, right? Back then a barn raising, right? A barn raising literally was, right? Everybody going, oh, John over here, his family needs our help to raise the barn. Nobody got paid. Nobody got,
right.
You all went over there and helped.
Because at some point you're going to need a barn raised.
Yeah, the other one that I always tell people about is marketing. Why do they call it marketing? Well, because it started in the market. It was people after Sunday, after taking their wagon and going an hour to church, bringing their stuff there and trading products, services, for each other, talking about what they could do for the other person and everything else. And that's the way it started. And government wasn't over top of that or anything and taxing every single transaction and all of that. It just happened.
Yeah. And in this Paul Revere book, it is amazing how much of a freer society and a much more peaceful society they had. And you see in the difference between and obviously there's 15,000 people in Boston in this little hamlet, and I've been there. I mean, it's amazing how small Boston in the North End is. But you had a very peaceful society, and then but you still had fights. You still had all the things that come with human beings being involved. We're never going to get rid of that. We're never going to progress to the point where we erase all violence, where we erase all molestation, where we erase war totally. It's always going to exist because we're a fallen species.
Right.
But you do have a responsibility, and that's so. I think it ties back into kind of what all this ties back into why you guys are here. You know, good marketing, community service, not leading with basically libertarians being assholes. And we've talked a little bit about Arvind Vora, who is the vice chair of the National Libertarian Party. And he made it his mission, as he does on every Memorial and Veterans Day, to lead the charge about just basically being anti-military, anti-soldier. And listen, it goes back to my personal beliefs are that I'm a non-interventionist, and I am anti-war. And I don't believe in war because I don't believe that violence solves the problems. I think it creates more problems. I think if anybody disagrees with that, let's look at the Middle East and ISIS and the rise of the fallout of our intervention in the Middle East through Iraq and Afghanistan. Obviously, George knows that better because he's actually been to Afghanistan, which we'll talk about. But, you know, when you're trying to message and win people over, Doug is somebody who is libertarian curious and has libertarian leanings.
I really like that.
And George is somebody who is. Are you a Libertarian Party member? Or you?
I donate to the state and county party. Never received a card. I don't know if I was supposed to, but I've never donated to the National Party.
Okay, why have you not donated to the National Party?
So I donated to Gary Johnson's actual campaign, and then as I was kind of starting to get more involved into the Libertarian movement, it just so happened to be that the people that I was linking up with were part of the state party, and I had limited funds that I was willing to donate, and so it just kind of started there because I think most of the work needs done locally rather than nationally.
Right. So he, like Arvin, after, and the bonus content this week is a discussion of the Indiana Libertarian Party passing a resolution saying Arvind Vora needs to resign because he doesn't represent us. And so you've got two people who served in the military here, and both of them contacted me after the Arvind stuff and said, hey, you know, if you ever want somebody on to talk about what it's really like to be in the military, I'd love to have you on. And Arvind continues yesterday at 11 a.m., military recruiting is human trafficking. You know, when let me ask this. All right, let's start with where you guys served, and then we'll get into your reactions to the comments. So let's start with, let's go age before beauty.
Doug served first.
Doug, what branch of the military when did you serve?
I was in the United States Navy. My dad was also in the Navy, so there was definitely some family, traits there and respect there. But I joined in. I went to high school and was a terrible student. Didn't apply myself. Smoking pot, way too much. And while all of I went to a Catholic school, while all of my friends were, prepping for college, I knew that my parents did not have that money. I didn't know that I could just go get student loans. Honestly, I was totally ignorant of that. And I knew I was kind of wayward. I didn't have confidence in myself. I was really abusing myself, as a person. I wasn't happy with who I was. And so the opportunity came up to join the Navy, I think in 11th grade first. So I went to MEPS, which is basically an entrance point for the military. And I got turned down because I had a broken knee at the time. And so they did exploratory surgery on my knee over the next year. And then I wound up going in 1986. And I went to nuclear power school in Orlando, Florida. Got booted out to the still kept getting into trouble, still kept drinking and everything.
You?
Yeah, and got booted out to the fleet. Got married and then went to Norfolk, Virginia. I was on a destroyer in Norfolk, Virginia for about a year, and then went to Gator Navy, which is basically amphibious assault vehicles and everything in Little Creek, Virginia, and then served in Desert Storm, Desert Shield over there for 11 months. And I did a number of other missions. We did one of the biggest ones that we did was we did a humanitarian mission to Hurricane Hugo, and that's one that that's the one that I'm always surprised that I had another friend of mine that was kind of a military hater, and I told him, I said, the biggest mission that I went on besides Desert Storm, Desert Shield was a humanitarian mission, and he was like, military doesn't do humanitarian missions. And I was like, okay, well, here's the medal. And then, and then go, seriously, for anybody listening, go out to Wikipedia and look up the humanitarian medal, for the United States. And you'll see that literally multiple times every single year. And in that year, it was Hurricane Hugo had destroyed Puerto Rico, literally leveled it, and was heading towards Norfolk. And I packed up my sea bag and left my family in Norfolk.
Is that code or?
Yeah. But left my family in Norfolk to jump on a ship to bring, water, water cleansers, whatever you want to call them, down to Hurricane Hugo. We actually went through Hurricane Hugo, had a huge crack in the ship as we were going through. Was wondering whether we were going to actually make it or not. And then went down there and spent, I don't know, it was a few weeks at least helping, set up equipment and everything down there. And it was, that was one mission. There was another mission where we served with, I don't know who they were. It was one of the Bahamas or something, but it was, this is how ignorant I am, but it was French speaking black
Haitians?
Maybe it was
Creole?
Haitian. Yeah, was it? Okay, so that's how ignorant I am. But that was a training mission that we went on down there. We were always either, obviously training, but it was always doing, every single day of my time in the military was training people below me how to be men, people above me training me how to be a man, and how to take care.
How did that work out?
How to take care. It did, right? I mean, the God's honest truth. I got out of the Navy because my ex-wife was. By the time I got out of the Navy, this is my final statement that I tell everybody. My last notice was a Red Cross message that I was in Israel, and it was back then it was telegram, literally, right? It was a radio message, and it said, "Wife overdosed at local hospital, son with friends."
Oh,
and
wow.
So my son was, I think he was about 1.5 years, 2 years old at the time. My wife had OD'd on the couch, and for 3 days, I think my son was like eating Cheerios out of a box or whatever.
Oh my gosh!
And so somebody came, found her, and everything else. And so, I flew back stateside, and she went to rehab, but eventually it led to a divorce, and I became a single father of my kids. So here I sit at 49 years old, single father to 2 incredible kids. I mean, my son has a PhD in math, the first PhD in our entire lineage.
Y'all kid, he's a Young Americans for Liberty
He
kid.
is,
I met him before I met you.
Yeah, he was president, I think, of Young Americans for Liberty out in University, Illinois. My daughter graduated, got her degree, so I never got my degree. So I have 2 kids that have degrees, 2 kids that have incredible jobs. I'm not, a raging alcoholic. I have a successful business down here, in Indianapolis. I mentor tons of people. Every single year we send a huge amount of our money goes to charity in Romania to support 3 safe houses to save women from human trafficking. That's what the military did. That's what it built my character and gave me the confidence, the trade ability, everything else to not just, obviously be willing to go to war, Desert Storm, Desert Shield. when you look back at them, it was easy, but when you were heading to them, it wasn't looking that good.
Yeah, no, I tell the story all the time. I turned 18 on September 9th, 2001.
Yeah.
I filed my selective service September 10th, 2001.
Yeah.
And then 9/11 happened the next day,
Yeah.
and I was shitting my pants.
Yeah.
I was terrified, but I was way too fat for the military. And there was no way they were ever going to take me. And when I got my 4F card, I was so happy.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It was the rigor and discipline that I needed, and I, if you say like the other thing that a lot of these folks say is, well, it's a welfare program. It's a welfare program. It's so offensive because I busted my ass. When most of the time that we were on the ship out at sea, it was 6 on, 6 off, which is basically 6 hours on, 6 hours off. So 12 hours a day, you're working,
Right.
not sitting around waiting for a chow. You're literally working. And then all of the other side of it is all of the ports that we went to, Rhoda, Spain, Israel, everything. We always went out and we had disciplinary, requirements when we went out. We had, people telling us what was bad to do in that town, how to treat people, everything else, because we were representing the United States in that city, or country. And so that's the other side of it that I think people miss is the original idea behind the U.S. Navy wasn't to show our might. The original was to sail ships around the world and show what kind of people we were.
Mm.
And that's the thing is it's easy to hate people that you don't understand.
Right.
And so having a military presence in whatever 94 countries I think now or something like that, and having ships all over the world, what you fail to understand is that I've been spit on once in my life for being an American, and it was when I was in Paris way after the Navy. But when I was in the Navy,
that's because you're just being yourself. Or?
I was actually in a really, really deep Islamic section of town, and I didn't realize it. She asked if I was Canadian, and I said, "No, I'm American." Yeah, wrong answer. But those are the other things. Is I think it's really important, whether it's the Peace Corps, whether it's religious charities, whether it's the military. It is absolutely essential for us to be all over the world helping people so that they realize what an incredible country we are. If we just retreated and I agree with you totally on the war side and intervention side from a war standpoint. But that's the primary purpose of a defense is a defense, not an offense, right? And it's our national defense. And part of that defense is absolutely showing our power, but also showing, the good of what our country can do to help others. And you look at Afghanistan and Iraq, how many schools we built, and how many people forget this.
Sure.
They don't pay attention to that.
But the problem with some of the schools, there's some of the stuff that you said in there, like some of the schools, for instance. Like if you really study the schools in Afghanistan, before you and I go but there's several things in there that I want to counter, but I want to give George the opportunity to kind of introduce himself before we get into this discussion. So George, what's your age range? Like, are you late 20s, early 30s?
So between late 20s and early 30s.
All right, and so we're around the same age. When did you join?
So I joined a little over 10 years ago when I was still in high school. Joined the Guard, have been in the Guard my whole time. Went to ROTC while I was at college. So I enlisted first and then went to ROTC while I was in college and then commissioned into the Guard. Mm-hmm. Since college, I've spent most of my time working full-time for the National Guard. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that I think a lot of people, when they think of the National Guard, they just think of the 1 week a month, 2 weeks a year, but it takes a lot of full-time staff to support the people that come in just on the part-time. Yeah. And so I've done a variety of jobs working full-time for the National Guard. Deployed to Afghanistan in 2012.
Ish.
Yeah. There's enough people over there at 2012 that I think we'll be all right.
Right, okay.
But so I deployed to Afghanistan in 2012. And that was really when my kind of libertarian path started.
Okay.
It kind of started and waned throughout, but that was the first time that I voted third party because of a friend that was there. Mitt Romney and Barack Obama were the two choices. And that was the first time I was like, I'm tired of lesser of two evil. And a friend told me, hey, there's this guy named Gary Johnson. He used to be a governor. You should check him out.
What was your
I was in
political
Neo.
Hey, loud noise for...
All right.
All right.
What was your ideological bent before that?
So I was definitely a neocon. Always loved politics throughout high school, throughout college. And I went to a pretty liberal college. So being a conservative, wearing my NRA hat around on campus, I stuck out like a sore thumb. And loved to engage and debate people during class. But I didn't have much depth to it. And so, in 2008, didn't really like John McCain, but thought, he's not bad. Voted for him mostly on reputation than understanding him. Ron Paul had kind of started to intrigue me that, hey, maybe there's something to him, but I wasn't all the way there yet, most like on drug legalization and stuff like that. And then so we get to 2012, and it's like, all right, Mitt Romney is a terrible choice.
Right.
I supported Ron Paul throughout the campaign. Now, a lot of that campaign I spent overseas, so I wasn't able to experience a lot of it. But so then when it was coming time to the election, I was talking to one of my friends that was over there and said, these two choices are terrible. I'd rather not vote than vote for one of these two, Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. And he said, hey, there's this guy named Gary Johnson who was a governor out in New Mexico. You should check him out. And so I voted for him then, and then that really kind of started my path towards looking at the Libertarian Party and looking at third parties.
So what was it about Mitt Romney that you just didn't like?
He just seems so weak and shallow and way too politician-y.
You were a good judge of character.
Yeah.
I missed it. I was like, hey, I think this guy's a pretty stand-up guy.
Like, I think he's a genuinely good person, but I think I remember seeing him in 2007 here in Indianapolis, and he gave a press conference at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, and there was like a place where they put him in the conference room, but it was very awkward because he was standing behind the sit-down desk.
Yeah.
And it was just input, question, output, talking point. He was so robotic, and he carried that. He didn't learn anything that next time around. But
the big thing for me, the lesson learner for me was, when he went really toe-to-toe to go after Trump, I was literally just aghast because I was like, man, if you would have been this way with Obama, you probably would have won the election. The fact that you're more offended, at this dumbass,
right?
Than the guy that literally dragged the country into socialism. Like,
yeah, he's thinking about running for Senate in Utah because Orrin Hatch may retire. So tell us. So you were in the Guard and you were over in Afghanistan, and that was when you started to really develop libertarian leanings. What was it about being in Afghanistan that kind of started to lead you down that path?
So there were a couple different things. One, probably the biggest one, was a book that I read that I can't recommend to people enough about counterinsurgency. It's called Who Will Teach the Wisdom by Timothy Bax, B-A-X. And I recommend it to anybody I talk to in the Guard. I just bought 5 copies of the book to give to some of my subordinates. And what he goes through, so he was in the Rhodesian Bush War, and he goes through kind of the start of his career and how they would drive around in these presence patrols and, flying the flag, letting everybody know they were there. And I'm reading that, I'm like, hey, that's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
Like almost every day we go through the briefing of the purpose of this operation is for a presence patrol. And so then I kept reading the book, and later there's a quote in the book from one of the locals that says, "A roaring lion catches no prey." I'm like, holy crap, that's so simple and brilliant, and it's absolutely what we do. And so in reading through that book, you see the progression of the way they handle that insurgency is that they integrated themselves more with the locals. They started setting up, just these small teams that were watching the villages, figuring out where the insurgents were, and then they would kill them. Then they started disguising themselves as insurgents and killing the insurgents. But then later, where it finally got its big development, is a quote where one of the locals says, "When a man kills a snake, all the other snakes just rise up and hate that man. When a snake kills a snake, the snakes become afraid of that snake." And what he meant by that was, as long as an outsider was the one killing the insurgents, it was never going to stop. It had to be them that stopped it. And so I'm just sitting here looking at what we're doing over there. I'm like, oh my gosh, we are doing the same stuff they started doing and realized failed 40 years before this.
Right.
And we've still just been executing that same strategy.
We still are. I mean, that's
right.
The SEALs were doing presence work and then all of a sudden decided to go and you go and you look at the CNN actually went to the village where the Navy SEALs were killed in Niger. And you look at this village and you just go, really? Like, what this just dump in the middle of nowhere, like, no offense, I'm sorry I'm being culturally insensitive here, but it's a dump. It is literally the most, like, think of the most sand-laden movie set you can think of. Indiana Jones hung out there with a bunch of snakes in a pit, like, and this is where the terrorist insurgents are launching out. It just, to me, it just something didn't wash in seeing where our soldiers actually were executing these raids. Is why do so many soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq and active duty over the last 15 years, why have so many of them been attracted to Ron Paul and Gary Johnson?
Well, I think that the thing about Ron Paul is that as a military member, I felt that he actually cared about the military. When he talked about why he wanted to bring us home, he wanted to bring us home because he cared about us and didn't want to keep putting us in harm's way on a fool's errand.
Right.
And so that was the thing that attracted me most to him. My foreign policy, my thoughts on fighting insurgency were lining up with what he was saying, but he was saying it in such a way that it made you agree with him. It made you want to follow him because he wanted to bring you home because he didn't want you to die and get blown up or shot in this foolish war with these bad tactics. And so that was really what kind of attracted me to him and opened my eyes towards a lot more of libertarianism was here was a guy speaking, courageously against all these neocons on stage. He was the only one willing to say these wars are dumb. And he did it in such a way where he cared more about us than they did. And now there's a point where we are the military. We have elected to sign up for this. When we need to be used, don't be afraid to use us. But make sure you're prudent about when you choose to use us.
Right.
I think that there have been wars in our history that were just, but most of them were unjust. And so that's kind of really the friction point of what I see with a lot of the neocons, that they love to trumpet their support for the military, but they're abusing us with the way they send us out.
Sure.
It's interesting because I am not a neocon, and I'm pretty much an all or nothing military guy. I agree with you that, like, I don't want politicians running wars. I want when we get to a point where we have to go to war, I want our military leaders running the war and then coming back saying, we killed everything, it's done.
Yeah, you're a Greg Lynn's libertarian. Make sure it's glass before you leave.
Yeah, but the thing is, I had the pleasure, and it's just good timing with this. Last night I got to see the premiere of a movie called No Greater Love, and you can go to nogreaterlovemovie.com. And these are guys in the 101st Airborne that were over in the worst sections of Afghanistan. It was after, like, Restrepo and if you've seen that, that one. And then the guys that actually there, we interviewed one of them, Tom, on the show last week, Purple Heart winner. And the thing is when they were over there, they were in the worst section of Afghanistan, very, very worst. Literally, this was a place that Russia lost, to the insurgency there. And the thing, I would recommend the movie was, it's historic because it was done by a chaplain that carried a camera, and then the troops that carried GoPros. And so there's no outside producer. There's this was their story. And then they show you the camaraderie of war, what these guys went through, and then coming back even, and the hope for them. But one of the things that these guys really said, and this is where I believe too, is they didn't say this, but I'll say it, is these people declared war on us. And I don't give a shit about Congress declaring war and who signs a piece of paper or whatever. But when a group of people come together and say, we are declaring war, we're going to rage mayhem on your people wherever we can, whenever we can, anywhere in the world, we're at war. I don't give a shit. And let me finish.
Right, okay.
The other part of that,
constitutionalist in me wants to punch you right now. But.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. But this war. The other part of it is that people pretend like the one of the things, and I see this in libertarian chains as well, is somehow we're the cause of this. Somehow our manipulation and our presence in the world and everything else. Like these assholes were killing us from day one. The walls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli were fighting Muslims that were taking our people and enslaving them on ships. And so from day one of our military, these people were killing each other long before America was even around. So somehow saying that these barbaric people that have been killing everybody that came into their, that in there, and it's the other side of it is these are not people going to school on Monday and taking classes and looking forward to college. These people are 1,000 years behind us, and they recognize terror, they recognize horror. These guys, some of the stuff in the movie that's it's just epic. Is when they came into those cities, because it was outsiders that came into those cities. We weren't fighting the farmers in those places in Afghanistan. We were fighting the insurgency. The first thing the insurgency did was take over a town, hang 5 people, behead them, and hang their bodies up for everybody to see that if you're not with us, we're going to kill you. And these are farmers and farmers' kids and everything else. The second one was that, there's a part in the movie that's fucking horrifying. And that's that, there was a kid and they interview him and he's bawling his eyes out about it. But, there was a burqa, a blue burqa woman walking towards them. They were on watch, locked and loaded, everything. And, which was really weird because 1, women don't walk alone. And then 2, she was wearing a bright dress, which was pretty bizarre. And so they radioed and they said, do we have permission to, shoot? And they said, no, you don't have permission to shoot. She blew herself up, killed the one guy next to the guy that asked permission to shoot, blew another guy's legs off. And then these guys that were in this, in this group had to come in, the 101st came in and did a body search, looking for every part of her body so that they could put this story together. Winds up, it was a 13-year-old mentally handicapped girl that was a villager's daughter that they strapped the bomb on, these guys did, and had her, walk towards them and pull the thing. And this guy's bawling. He's like, I'm sitting there and I go, I didn't want to kill a woman, but my best friend died, right next to me. And so war isn't this clean, neat little, get your spreadsheet out and let's figure this out. This is a dirty, nasty war with people that are not in uniforms, that are not playing by the rules, that are not playing by the Geneva Convention. So, I just sit there and I just go, it's a fucking disgusting thing that we're in right now. And I, if you ask those guys, someone asked at the end of the movie, they said, should we be over there? And the guy said, they're going to find their way here. We killed them there. Like, if we stop, they're coming. And that's the thing is, not whether we like it or not, they're coming.
Yeah, ISIS has actually put out a call now to say stop trying to come to build a caliphate in the Middle East, just stay in your homeland, and that's why you see like the Uzbek terrorist in New York City. Like it's you're going to see more and more of these mass killings with trucks, with whatever they can get their hands on.
Well, there's a huge cultural divide. Part of the ignorance of this country is, when I know I pissed off a bunch of my friends when we were, open borders, let the refugees in, and I was like, are you fucking shitting me? Like, this is a culture clash. This is not. You don't take people that treat women as secondary citizens and throw gays off of roofs and welcome them into your home. There's a process that needs done, and so we just have this general ignorance that, oh, well, if we were just nicer to the world, they wouldn't hate us so much. No, sorry.
George, rebut all that.
So that's something that I think is used, or that we hear a lot of. It's either fight them over there or fight them over here, but that's a false choice. I think there are more options than that than, mass occupation over there across the entire Middle East, or deal with more terrorists here, because I think that it removes some of the cause of why are we their target.
Yeah, I'm not for mass occupation either, though.
And so now, what is the most effective way to deal with terrorism? I don't know, but I know that the way we're doing it is not working.
But but that's assuming that there is a way that will work.
Work in totality? No, because we're a fallen. Humanity is fallen.
Right.
But what is the most effective way to minimize it, reduce it? That's a hard question for sure.
Right.
But the way that we institute our foreign policy of everything is in the United States national security interests. We've changed what national security means to encompass everything that happens in the world affects the U.S. national security. And because of that, we then justify to ourselves doing whatever we want, wherever we want, and saying, hey, it's our national security interests.
Well, we also benefit from that too. Right?
Oh, of course.
I mean, let's not pretend, the fact that we're sitting here safe and sound and everything, part of it is that we go beat the crap out of, people that we disagree with around the world, and we infiltrate their politicians, and we pay off bad people.
Well, essentially, to what you're saying is the post World War II world, the military superpower of the United States is we built the biggest military in the history of the universe, likely, and it's as big as every military on the planet put together at this point. That threat, that might.
Well, we spend more money. Not the biggest.
Yeah, I know. China has more soldiers, of course, but more might. It neutralizes and atrophies other people, and
it creates resentment.
Well, you guys might be surprised to find out that I would love to see the military defense budget be hacked.
Sure,
I am not a. Part of the other experience of being a veteran was seeing the waste, the absolute terrible, terrible waste that. When people raise the flag of patriotism and say, look, I'm going to increase the military budget, that makes me cringe.
Give me examples of waste.
Sure. I was on the USS Spartanburg County, and we were ordered to empty out a room on the ship. They wanted to make an office out of it. You're on a ship in the middle of the ocean. So empty out this room, a room with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment in there. What do you think they were telling us to do?
Throw it in the ocean.
Throw it in the ocean. Yes, and we threw it in the ocean. And so they're not telling us to throw it in the ocean, but they're telling us to throw it in the ocean. When I was on the USS Kuntz in Philadelphia Naval Shipyards, anything that was left on the ship during decommissioning had to be inventoried. Do you think there was anything left on that ship to be inventoried? Right. No. And so there's things
Meaning
like
it just found a new home in somebody's garage?
On the bottom of the ocean, in somebody's garage, wherever it was. And so I, part of my, that's where I'm, from a libertarian standpoint is I do believe in constraints that in a time of war, lift the constraints that, again, let the battle be, done. But in a time of peace, this ridiculous notion that we don't have enough money invested in our military is just ridiculous. Now you want to talk about military pay for members? Sure, let's talk about that. But let's track down every dollar.
Well, yeah, I mean, just for instance, going into Iraq where you didn't have the right plates on the Humvees, and it cost hundreds of soldiers' lives in IEDs when we're spending $2 billion on a fighter jet we don't need. What were some of the ways that you experienced, George?
But I want to add something to that. There's this thing called mil-spec, and military specifications. Mil-spec, in my opinion, and this is going to piss veterans off or whatever, is mil-spec is that great way to keep other contractors the hell out of your contract. And that's that. Come up with 42 different ways to test a screw so that nobody compete with you on selling a $400 screw to the military. And so it winds up being this welfare program for corporations, and politicians are literally too weak to stop it.
Yeah.
Because when you're sitting in, Western Pennsylvania, and you've got 10,000 people that are working at a tank plant, and I'm just making that up. That's not a true story, and we've got these tanks literally going into warehouses where they dry up and they're never used because we're not going to have a tank battle like that.
Right.
But these politicians are too weak-kneed to say we need to cut that out of the budget.
Yeah.
Because they're going to, now all of a sudden unemployment's, I mean, that's why Obama, as non, military friendly as he was, you didn't see him cut it.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't he cut it? Because the unemployment rate would have skyrocketed if military defense contractors had to start all of a sudden closing their doors.
What's some of the ways you saw, George?
So what I see as being, I think, probably most damaging and pervasive as far as waste is concerned is the way the military views the spending of money and their budgets. So if any business that has a budget, if you're given a budget of $1 million for a project and you come in at $500,000, people are high-fiving you because you just saved the company $500,000. Mm-hmm. You do that in the military, and they say, well, now you got to go figure out how to spend that $500,000. Yeah. You are borderline reprimanded for turning money in.
I'll tell you that was Desert Storm, Desert Shield. Prior to Desert Storm, Desert Shield, the ship that I was on was constantly having breakdowns where we did not have budget to fix things. Constantly. We were not ready. And so, but when Desert Storm, Desert Shield went through, we had open shit. It was open shit season, which basically meant you didn't have to get an authorizing signature. You could go buy whatever you wanted. And that's when I started to see that was all of a sudden they did hold, it was a lot like a budget, for a company, before Desert Storm, Desert Shield. And people were demoted if they spent the money wrong and didn't maintain operational readiness and everything else.
Right.
After Desert Storm, Desert Shield, it was everybody, and they raised the Patriot flag, right? Mm-hmm. We open up the floodgates.
Yeah, that's how I remember the hammer, the $8 million hammer, and the $5,000 ashtray or whatever.
And I've sat in meetings before. So the federal fiscal year ends on September 30th of every year. I've sat in meetings where mid-August, early September, they're saying, we've still got this much money left. How are we going to spend it?
It's terrible.
And especially when you get down kind of to some of the lower levels, each level up kept a little cut for themselves just in case. It's kind of an emergency budget. Well, if they didn't spend it at the end of the year, all of a sudden all this money just comes flooding down, and they're saying, how are you going to spend this money? How are you going to spend this money? And you can't turn it back. They won't let you turn it back in. And even people that are trying to be prudent with the government's money are sitting there saying, let's spend it on things that we need. Let's not waste it. but we have to spend it.
That's how it is in congressional offices too, where Rand Paul gets, he sends it back every year, and so he gets, but in every other congressional office.
Let's not lie. I mean, I worked for big corporate America, and it's
they all
the
do
same
it too.
way
Yeah.
And so that's something that I've challenged people on before too, where they would say, "Well, if we don't spend it, we won't get the money next year." And I say, "Has anybody ever tried that?"
Right.
But that's the belief
It's a great
of, even when it comes down to ammunition. Oh, we got to shoot this ammunition because if we don't and we ask for it next year, then we won't get it. It's like, how do you know? Are they really going to withhold ammunition that you're asking for because you were prudent?
Yeah.
Because you were prudent with it the year before? Let's try it.
So I want to go back to some of Doug's points because I can hear the speakers of every libertarian being lit on fire based on pretty much. And I imagine you, as Doug was talking about, non-interventionism and foreign power. Hold on.
Well, I want to say to you, though, I do believe Congress should declare war.
Sure.
I absolutely. As soon as someone says we're going to war with you, I believe they should go find their balls.
Right.
And go vote yes to war and go do the job and get it over.
Instead of these vague defense authorization acts that are broad, or like the idea that Donald Trump is the only person on the planet that has the power to fire that. Like,
it's ridiculous.
There's no sense that the president of the United States, especially a Donald Trump, should be the only person to turn the key for nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
I turned into Bush there. Nuclear. Now, so George, what about being over there and being in those cultures and being in that situation started to turn you into a non-interventionist?
Well, so part of it was just the way that our military could and would interact with people. So one huge thing to Afghans, whether it was the police, the army, or just the local villagers, was that they wanted to eat with you. They wanted to serve you a meal. But so kind of in my role, I was more of an attachment. I didn't necessarily have...
Honestly, Doug, we should sign up. We should go. You and I would be great, great ambassadors for America. Feed us.
I had great meals in Kuwait and United Arab Emirates. And
so I was an attachment. I wasn't in charge of planning necessarily any of the missions. And the platoon leaders that were over there, it was always... They never wanted to eat with them. It was always, well, I guess we'll eat. Yeah, oh no, we got to get back. They would make up we got to get back to the base and do maintenance on our truck. And they always wanted to get out of it. And it's like, wait a second. If we are going to do counterinsurgency, if we can't even build a relationship with the Afghan National Police that want to work with us, how are we ever going to build a relationship with the elders? And so in part of my role, I had cash that was available for me to do what were called quick impact projects. Where if I had identified a need while meeting with the police or with elders, I had a couple $1,000 limits that I could spend on projects. We mostly did it on wells or road repair. Well, so there was one point where I sat in a negotiation through an interpreter for 3 hours about 5 well projects. And when the meeting started, it was a full meeting of 5 elders, 2 interpreters, and about 10 other Americans. By the time the meeting was over, all the other Americans had left because it wasn't important to them.
Right.
That building that relationship and that getting to, and ultimately, and I thought that I overspent. I was like, man, when I get back, my boss is going to be pissed that I spent all my money. And when I got back and told him, he looked at me, he goes, that's incredible. I can't believe that you were able to get through that meeting with him and get that working relationship with him. I was like, yeah, I just sat there and talked to him for 3 hours.
Right.
I listened to them. And when they had a gripe, I said, there was a gripe about a previous meeting that I wasn't at, but they had a gripe, and I would just listen to it and apologize for it and say, I'm sorry I wasn't there. You guys should have been included as well. And I just worked with them and I listened to them. And that's something that is lost in the way our military does counterinsurgency. And I think that's a lot of that is because of the tactics of our nation in doing counterinsurgency, that we're going to go over there and we're going to, just kill the terrorists, take them out. We need a relaxed rules of engagement so that we can kill as many terrorists as possible. And then we're going to come in and build them a school and they're going to love us. no, that's not the way it works.
Yeah,
We need to sit down and build a relationship with them, understand what it is they need, understand how we can help, how we can partner with them, and not impose what we want to do on them. But even should we be there in the first place?
Sure.
But I think another thing
that's a question though, right? Is because what you're talking about is still intervention, and that's why that's when you said that, like, it was kind of George versus my view of it. I look at exactly what you're saying, and I say that's absolutely logical. I think that's great. What it shows to me is that there was poor military leadership.
Absolutely.
On how we were working over there, and whether we were going to, whether we were doing more harm than not. But it was still an intervention.
Now, one area of
Petraeus was somebody who understood that whole concept and was fired because, well, first he was fired because he was fucking his book editor. And so, but then, and then McChrystal, I mean, I guess the firings of Petraeus and McChrystal, in terms of McChrystal talking badly about commanders in Rolling Stone, bad look.
Yeah.
And then Petraeus leaking state secrets, which were not nearly as classified as what Hillary did. Right. But that's nonetheless.
There's a lot of military people that will disagree with me, but I think drone strikes are the worst intervention that we can have.
Really?
Because
I agree with you. I really feel strongly. People keep asking me this. They just think, well, that's there's not a loss of military life, and I was like, I think in any war that should be the risk. Like I hate being in a war where we don't have to weigh the blood of our own people.
Yeah,
that's a scary.
The New York Times did the daily podcast yesterday. Was with an Iraqi family in the middle of a drone strike. I mean, they basically talked about that because in some ways, Georgia, I would look at it and go, well, I would rather have you playing a video game and not putting your life at risk. But in some respects, I could see the other side of it, where if we don't have skin in the game, then we're going to make more mistakes.
We should have to weigh the cost of human life. Period. Whether it's an enemy or our own, I just don't think it should be easy to just sit there and blow people up all over the world. That's where I think you and I have common ground. Is that's not. I started out by saying what I loved about the military was I was in other countries representing my own. I wasn't out killing people.
Right.
That wasn't the point, And that's exactly what we're talking about here. Is that there's alternative ways of doing this. The other one is I really too also believe that there was a transition when I got out of the Navy that I was glad when I got out of the Navy, and that was one of the things when I got that Red Cross message, and it was, I'm sitting there and I don't know who my son's with. He's with friends or something. I don't know whether my wife's going to die or be alive or not. We were going through an engineering assessment basically in Haifa, Israel, and so my direct officer said, well, all I can do is authorize you 24 hours emergency leave from Haifa, Israel.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
And so now the funny part of it is I went and talked to my, counselor. Every ship has a counselor, and I said, what do I do? And he goes, take it. He was like, get back over there and then put in for your humanitarian transfer. But the thing that it shocked me after 6 years of being just an incredible sailor, I got in trouble at first, but I was awarded National Navy Achievement Medal over there. I did my damnedest. I loved the Navy. I was spit and polished by the end of it. Everything else was when my wife was OD'd, they didn't want me to go home. What? Because they wanted to pass an exam. Well, kiss my ass, and that's when I really started to see, I don't know what your experience is with the National Guard. I started to see people making, E7, which is basically the enlisted, 7th rank, or in the Navy, it's a chief. I think it's
Sergeant First Class. Gunny in the Marine Corps.
Yeah. I started to see these guys making it in 8 years, 7 years. And that was unheard of. Like when I first went in the Navy, if you made E7, you were probably in for 15 plus years. And I really felt like all of a sudden it turned into this political beast where people were getting rank for politics. And
right.
They abandoned being honestly, military, and it turned into this. How can I get advancement quicker? How can I get advancement quicker? And I feel like I started to look at these chiefs that there was, once upon a time when you went to a chief, it was like going to your grandfather.
Right.
This was a guy that would kick someone's ass for you and kick your ass if you needed it. And by the time I got out, I was like sick to my stomach seeing what these guys were just pawns that would do whatever, the officers told them to do.
Like typical government bureaucracy.
Yeah.
But I want to circle back to the drones thing because I want to hear your perspective on the drones.
Yeah.
Why do you think they're a problem?
Well, so one of the biggest problems with them is that they're not as discerning as what they're claimed to be. They're not as precision with what people claim to be because usually whenever we fire them, it's at a group. And so you don't have positive identification on everybody within that group. Now, the Obama, including the current one, the past 3 administrations will just kind of group all the military-age males. Those were terrorists. No civilians were killed. It's like, come on. From up there, you don't know that.
Right.
There's no way of knowing that. Any women were killed? Well, they were probably a part of it. They might have been. But from up there, you don't know that. And just what it communicates to the people down there that they have to constantly be in fear of having that dropped on them. I mean, that just makes a right picking for, the Taliban or terrorist organization to come in and say, look how evil these people are.
Right.
Yep.
And so drone intervention, I am totally against. If we want to use armed drones in a force-on-force conflict against, another world power in a war like that, that's different than using them in counterinsurgency. And so how do we solve an insurgency problem, a terrorism problem? I don't know, but coming in primarily with force isn't the right answer, especially an impersonal force like that. Now, you guys talked about a couple episodes ago, Niger and us being over there, and just kind of in general our training partnerships. Probably what I would guess most people, even within the Guard, almost nobody outside the Guard knows that most National Guard states have as 1 or 2 foreign countries that they are state partners with. And so they will send people over to that country to train, and then that country will send people to us to train. So like in Ohio, their state partners are Hungary and Serbia. And so they will do a lot of cross-training. That is an area where I think that we can help, build good partnerships, help stave off some of those negative aspects of terrorism because of the way we're kind of helping each other out. It's a partnership. We're learning more about each other. I mean, whenever they come here, whenever we go there, cultural integration and understanding is a major part of it.
Yeah.
It sounds exactly kind of like what we talk about on this program all the time, which is human-to-human contact is what breeds good feelings. And separating, isolating, ostracizing, demonizing, and then doing things that reinforce that notion are kind of what's happening in a lot of these places. So, and it goes back to like in Japan when we dropped the bomb. It reaffirmed to everyone in Japan after we basically completely destroyed through bombing the entire island of Japan, and then we dropped 2 nuclear weapons on them. Like, we had decimated that island. So they already had just this terrible notion of us because they'd been told forever Americans are monsters, and then terror from the skies is unleashed. And so to make that mistake again, it just doesn't seem to.
I don't think it was a mistake.
Of course you don't. There's
plenty of horrors in that aren't, that people aren't educated on from coming the opposite. I mean, millions of Chinese just absolutely decimated. So
read the Japanese infestation of the Koreas, but no. So I mean, as somebody who has been there, do you think, George, that we should be there? I mean, in what capacity should the American military continue to be in a place like Afghanistan?
Certainly not a large capacity. Whether we should be there at all, I'm a little bit up in the air on. I can see both sides of it that, we're 16 years in. We have, we've literally not made progress, except that the Taliban isn't in full control. Other than that, we haven't made any progress. I saw something from Reason earlier that this year was their highest yield in opium. Okay, the area I was in 2012 is now under the hands of the Taliban again. At least it was for a period about a year ago. And so, certainly with the same strategy, we should not be there. If we need to mostly pull out and then relook at a new strategy and send a little bit back in, that reflects that partnership building element to it, then that's a maybe. Now, if they don't want our help, there has to be a certain point where we say, okay, this is the choice that you guys have made. If you don't want our help, if you're going to succumb to, the temptations of the Taliban, you can have it. If you want to live under terror, you can have it.
Hold on just a second, but it doesn't stop at the borders.
I want to ask something directly about that, because one of the things that I've always heard about the problem, why the Taliban comes back in, is that Americans, even though we are there, everybody says, well, what if we pull out and we abandon them, and then it's the Taliban will infest it? But the problem is that Americans, in the eyes of many of the villagers, don't keep their word, because they do things like not follow through on promises, or if they build a school, it's a photo op, and then the school collapses, and it's not even a real school. It's got dirt floors, and it's just a weird concrete structure.
Well, it's because we don't know who they are. Right. The cultural training is just, it's so basic. It's a couple-hour PowerPoint slide that's our cultural training.
For soldiers
that go over there. We had this interactive thing to try and learn a little bit of the language that was absolutely pointless. After you walked away from it, you didn't remember a single thing that you had learned, and so it was just useless. And so one of the little quips of wisdom from that book that I referenced earlier, he says, if you do not understand my customs, you will not understand who I am or what I am. And that is the fatal flaw in the way we view things. Now, having conventional soldiers over there to try and, all of a sudden flip them around to where they do understand how to culturally integrate, that's not going to work. But even with our special operations, special forces, which is the Army Special Operations, counterinsurgency, integrating with the culture, that's one of the things they're trained on. But they, over there, from what I saw, they did more direct action raids type stuff than they did cultural integration. As far as living with them, they lived on their own compound. They weren't totally integrated with the populace. They were rolling around in SUVs or Polaris Rangers that had machine guns on them. They're wearing all their kit, rolling around, and so you can't integrate with somebody while you have a machine gun.
So the idea that we look like an unreliable partner to them is probably
an aggressive partner.
Aggressive. Okay.
But there's not one people over there. There's multiple people over there, and I think like watching that movie last night and listening to those guys really opened my eyes to this. That we're not dealing with one person when we're in an outpost in Afghanistan. We're dealing with the native people that are just trying to farm and live their lives peacefully, and then we're dealing with insurgents that are terrorizing those people and want to kill us and are using them, as human shields, as suicide bombers, as everything else. And so it's not as easy as just, we'll get to go in, because these guys in this movie, they said the people loved them. What they hated was that we did leave, and so we protected them. We got the Taliban out. That was great. They got to go take care of their farms. They got to start all over again. They got peace. And then what would happen? Change presidents, change general, change whatever. And we pull out, and the Taliban comes right back.
Have you seen War Machine on Netflix? Either of you? I highly recommend it. It's basically along those concepts. So what's the solution?
Well, that's what I say. The thing is that's where I don't think. I think we talk a lot about what we're doing wrong, but I don't know that it's wrong. I don't. That's the thing, is we don't know that it's wrong. We don't know that it might be the best thing that we could possibly do. We don't know, and that's where I get, I don't mind us being over there killing people that are taking 13-year-old mentally handicapped girls and strapping bombs on them. I don't mind us being over there one bit, trying to clean up that mess, from a humanitarian standpoint.
So you're okay with? We're in 6 now, going into 7. We're in 7 active war fronts.
Yeah, we're not though. We're piddling around and doing all this political bullshit, and that's where I agree with you from before. Is constitutionally, I would like us to see us declare war, get a fucking game plan together, execute that game plan, see if it works. If it doesn't come back, like George said, reevaluate the game plan, try another way, and just keep doing it until we start to get our hands on this. It's just that I reject the notion that this is somehow our fault and we're aggravating things. When someone's running at you trying to kill you, asking if you're aggravating that person is not a logical question.
Well, with one of the things you said when you were referencing that movie, that we showed up, we drove out the Taliban,
yes,
and then we left.
Right.
Well, I think that there lies the problem, is that we were the ones driving out the Taliban, not them.
Not farmers.
They're not just farm. I mean,
they are.
They're not just farmers. They have police forces, and their police forces aren't like ours.
Yeah.
They're more like a lower level military, or the way their police forces operate. They're not investigators.
We spend a lot of money on their police forces. They ought to be
right. And so
they're still years behind.
Now, how do we empower them to where the Afghan National Police, the Afghan local police,
right,
the villagers, they are the ones driving out the terrorists? How do we empower them? That's the question we need to answer.
Yeah, I agree.
But us doing the heavy lifting and then us leaving, they're just going to fill that void right back in.
Yeah.
If the Afghans are the one driving them out, or the Nigerians, or the Nigerians, or whatever country you want to choose,
you're right,
they have to be the ones driving them out.
Yeah. So you're a non-interventionist?
Yes.
George? Okay. So you...
Defining intervention as our military force,
right,
imposing on them.
So at what scale? So, I mean, because you could be a non-interventionist in the way that, like, my uneducated view... I wouldn't say
Nigeria, we were non-interventionist from a force standpoint.
Exactly.
And
now
our
we're
guys
interventionist.
died over there.
Right. I mean, so... from my point of view, I wouldn't say I'm uneducated. I would say that I'm more ignorant of the situation than obviously you are with experience. Non-interventionists, it's like, well, just bring them all home. We shouldn't be in 170 countries. Bring them all home. Blah blah blah.
That's what I think of it.
Right? Yeah. Like, what is your view of if you were to define non-intervention, what would you define it as?
That's a really challenging question. I think, for me, when I look at intervention into a foreign country's affairs, it's when we're not doing what's best for them, we're doing what's best for us. So when we're trying to impose our needs on their country, that's when whether it's militarily, politically, economically, that is when I think that we are having a negative intervention.
Let me say, everyone that does diplomacy with the goal of putting their interest first. I think it's force that is probably the dividing line there, where we don't really care what's best for. We don't know what's going to happen in Iraq. We just know that we're going to topple Saddam with force, as opposed to using diplomacy. I think that's a very clear dividing line. Like North Korea, there's a very clear dividing line. Our interest as Americans is to support South Korea, to support Japan, to support capitalist nations, to support America, and not having Alaska and Guam and other places bombed. There's an interest in diplomacy and making sure that they don't use force, but we also should not use force.
Well, I think diplomacy is, when it's best done, is when you're trying to figure out what's best for both parties, or however many parties involved. And you even look at that, and I can't remember where I read this recently, talking about it from a business perspective. If a businessman is known that he always gets the best deal, he always gets the upper hand of everybody else, eventually nobody's going to want to deal with him. It's when a deal can be made that benefits both parties, elevates both parties, that's when it's going to be most effective. And so if we are going to intervene, it's not, well, this is what America needs, so we're going to force you to do what we want for our best interests, and then that just pisses them off, and then they hate us. It's, okay, here's what's good for us, here's what's good for you. How can we make this happen for both of us? That's where our intervention is going to have a positive impact. And so, like I said, with some of the ways we partner with other militaries of, sending people over there, doing some exercises, learning about their culture, learning about them, eating their food, them coming over here, doing the same. That's where we're helping each other. Mm-hmm. Their military is getting better. Our military is getting better. Our countries are building a stronger relationship. That's a positive intervention, I think. Where it's negative is, you guys are going to do this because we said so, and we're bigger and we're stronger, and you have no choice.
Right. And our economy is so strong, and if our corporate rate weren't so high specifically, we won't get Doug started on that. I can't imagine the taxes that you've got to pay.
It's fucking ridiculous.
I'm currently figuring out how to pay the IRS what they want. But if we were more competitive economically, George came prepared, and so I want to make sure he has a whole list of things. So I want to make sure that that prep work. Is there anything on the list that you kind of talked about?
You got to head out soon?
I still have a good 25, 30 minutes.
All right, cool.
One of the things that we didn't touch on at the very beginning, before we started to talk about wars and stuff, is there's another side of the military that I really want to make clear to people too, and that's that I went to high school up in Vancouver, Canada, right? So pretty multicultural, no black people, but multicultural otherwise. And when I joined the Navy, that was the most black people I ever saw in my life, was getting off the bus at boot camp and everything else. And I saw incredible things. I saw black people that hated white people, and I saw white people that hated black people, and then I saw white people that hated black people that liked white people, and I hated.
Yeah.
I basically, it was the first time in my life that I really, really saw true, holy crap, people hate me because I'm white, and people hate this guy because he's black. Within 8 weeks, that was disappeared. I mean, wiped out. My chief was a black guy walker. If I would have said my chief was a black guy, he probably would have kicked my ass just for saying that. And so I had chief warrant officers, and I had Chief Walker, and I had these guys that were like my dad. And I mean that seriously. These are men that taught me to be men. And I didn't give a shit what color they were. I didn't give a crap what religion they were. Most of the time when you went to mass in the Navy, or and I'm sure it's in Army the same way, there was Baptist, Jews, evangelists, all in the same, all going to the same ceremony, and it was the one. And so if you want to look at a utopia of, it wasn't perfect. There was people that definitely, hung out and still kept their racist ways and everything else. But for the most part, the other piece of this that I want to talk about was, this is forced integration. I mean, forced integration where you absolutely drew respect for the other person, and you would kill for that person. And it was the one place and time in my life that before the Navy, I didn't pay a lot of attention to race. In the Navy, race just didn't matter at all. And after the Navy was when I started to see racism again. And so for people out there that they hear about the gender stuff, and they hear about, there's one thing in the military, is that most of the people came from I'd say underclass, right? These are people that couldn't afford to go to college and everything else. They went for a trade, or they went because their family went there. So these aren't our Yale and Harvard, grad Ivy League folks. And people will make a big deal about rape in the military and make a big deal about this in the military. I would say measure up any military against any major city, and you're going to see the class of people that came out of the inner city that went into the military have 1/1000th of the problems with crime and family issues and everything else because the military, we were colorblind. It just didn't matter. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, that's another aspect of the military that I thought was just freaking amazing that I'm thankful for.
And that kind of leads me to back to Arvin, to where, you know, part of my belief is that government's made up of people, and it creates perverse incentives because it forces some people to do certain things they don't want to do while enriching other people in ungodly ways, and benefits other people in bad ways, and it's harmful because of that force. But the people in government institutions, people in military, they're not bad people. I think Arvin, you know, in going back to your comment, it just struck me. Like, I don't think there was a more telling comment in this entire podcast than I liked Ron Paul because I felt like Ron Paul cared about me. And so, as members of the military, when I read this to you, I want to hear how it makes you feel.
I know what you're going to read.
Guys, we shouldn't speak badly of rapists. Many people rape, and they vote. If we attack them, they might not vote libertarian. That's how some of you sound when you suggest we pander to public school teachers, quote unquote, and members of the military welfare complex in order not to lose their vote. And then I followed up with military recruiting is human trafficking. I'm going to go to George first. What are your thoughts on that?
It's hard to even put it into words because it is so ignorant and naive. Because it views this entire class of people, which is a massive class if you look at people that work for government on a local, state, federal level, you know, in the military, to just blanket all of them as moral degenerates, in effect. Which you can argue that he was making an analogy, but what he chose to make an analogy with kind of imposes on that group or projects onto that group a moral degeneracy. Because, okay, if you want to, taxation's theft. And so, okay, if we are a beneficiary of taxation, then we are part of the theft. Theft is different than rape. You know, rape is so violent and destructive and taking of imposing yourself onto your victim in a way that theft isn't. And so to even use that as an example just shows a complete ignorance of people that work for the government, our motivations for working for the government. You know, when I look, that was one of the things that I wanted to talk about was people's motivations for joining. They vary a lot. Some of them it's for the benefits. Some of them it's because they see it as honorable. Their family did it. Some of them it's to be a part of a community, to learn a skill or a trade. Some of them, they look at, it's a bit more of a simplistic view. They see terrorists. Terrorists are evil people. Evil people need killed. And so it's a bit simplistic of, okay, is this the best way to end terrorism? But that they're doing it for their end that they're doing it for is good, that they want to end evil. And so to just blanket that with that rapist statement, and to me, the worst thing he posted was the gold star on Veterans Day that said, "You tried," or at least you tried. To me, that was just unbelievably stupid, unbelievably offensive, because we shouldn't celebrate anytime somebody dies doing something that they think is good. Whether you like the means that it's done by or not, you know, if you're totally against military intervention, then you should mourn when somebody dies serving in the military because their death was to you a waste. And so to poke fun at them and laugh at them shows that you really don't care about the people. What you really care about is your money. Mm-hmm. And to me, it revealed his true character. And like I said, I saw him, I've seen him speak in person before. I was impressed with the way he spoke, with the class that he gave. But because of the garbage that he would post like that, I had to unfollow him. And I totally support state parties that are trying to get him removed as vice chair because of what he has revealed his character to be.
Yeah. Now, Doug, first as a veteran, second as a Libertarian Party curious person, and third as a marketing professional, what are your thoughts on these comments?
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is that I'm so glad that we had a military welfare system that created ARPANET that enabled the internet, which allowed him to make these remarks on Facebook. So
it's ironic, yes. And how long before you have to?
But I've got 20 minutes still.
What's the hard out?
8:45. Walking out the door.
Cool.
You know, and the list goes on and on. Like I give you like flat screens. You know, people don't even realize this, but you know, the military, when flat screens first came out, they were not for the private sector. They were just absolutely ridiculously expensive to manufacture and everything else. What made the factories for mass production and everything else was that it was instant, like the lightweight, you know, that we could get rid of CRTs on military stuff, and we could outfit all of the equipment and save so much in volume and weight and transportation and logistics with those, that, you know, that's what drove down the initial, you know, costs of, you know, things like that. And so there's, you know, of course that's a, you know, definitely a social way of looking at, you know,
sure,
investment.
I always,
but the fact
not
is,
to get into an argument about it because I want to get back to Arvin, but like private economies, if you're an inventor and you create something that replaces CRTs, the benefit's much better if you're a private entrepreneur than if you're doing it for the military.
But my point is that they're just saying all bad comes out of the military is just not a. It's just not. It's really ignorant. It's just a false, you know, thing. Like George said, you know, I mean, the extremes to which he just it's absolutes that he's utilizing, and those are absolutes that, you know, are when applied to anything are really a sad thing to do. These are the same things that, you know, all liberals are bad people, or all neocons are monsters, or all. It's such a childish, juvenile way of looking at the world. And honestly, someone like him, if he had any balls, and I truly mean this, you know, he would go to an army base and hang out with veterans for, you know, a week, or a Navy base or whatever, and watch what they actually do for a living. You know, and that's the intriguing thing to me, is that when you get embedded, I had no idea what the military was about, you know, before I got in the military. I had no idea that, you know, in the Navy, you know, it's definitely trade first, you know, and then, you know, somewhere way down the line is military, you know, outside of wearing a uniform, you know, but I owe my entire career to the military. The attention to detail that I have, the process and discipline that I have on the way that I troubleshoot things, the analytical approach that I take to things, was crafted through the Navy. If you would have sent me to an electrical trade school, there's no way that I would have had as much practical as trying to keep a ship afloat, you know, out at sea for 4.5 years. And so the people like me come back and we're uber productive citizens. You know, that's the other side of the veteran, you know, thing that I really hate is I do despise the fact that, you know, a majority of the homeless, like even in Indianapolis, are veterans. And you know, and then we talk about veteran suicide, you know, quite a bit, and PTSD, and there's some stigmas associated with veterans. But the vast majority, I'm sure he met people every single day of his life that he absolutely respected, and he didn't know that they served. Right? You know, so he says these monstrous things without even, you know, acknowledging that part of the character that they had, you know, was the fact that they're in the military. You said, you know, you mentioned earlier, you know, was there a relationship between being in the military and being libertarian? Of course there is. You know, because it's working together as a team, but individually you're respected. You're you know, the ribbons that you have, you know, show the sacrifices that you made. The stripes that you wear are absolutely, you're branded with, the knowledge that you have and the experience that you have. And so everything about the military, as someone like him looks at it and sees just a giant bunch of green guys like us look at it and we go, oh, wow, that guy has a sharpshooter. That guy has a this. That guy has a that.
Yeah, he's looking at it, again, in a very flat, binary way without the nuance of how the world actually works. And like I've said before, our Facebook page, we've got 87,000 likes. The top 3 jobs, based on the analytics in the back end, are veterans, lawyers, and then government officials and teachers. Yeah. And so the people who interact with the government the most, they're the ones who have... You guys can sit here and say the waste, the wasted time, the wasted effort, the wasted, like all of this podcast. I just listen to this and I go, okay, well, my suspicions, a lot of it are confirmed correct about why we should be non-interventionists and why we need to decrease the military. And, I think kudos to George for kind of shading in some things where I go, okay, as a non-interventionist, these things are probably beneficial. In my lifetime, we will never not have a standing army. So, it's like for me to sit here and argue that we should not have a standing military and honor what the founders laid out and what I think is best, and we shouldn't be in 170 countries, that's just not going to happen in my lifetime. So I can learn and then advocate. And what Arvin is doing is Arvin is just shoving his eye in, and I'll be quite candid, I think if you're somebody who, as a person who has been a libertarian for 10 years, and you get to a point where you start to see the moral projection of your own values into society and where your income is coming from, that taxation is theft line, I don't think actually does anything to promote libertarianism. Yeah. I think it actually what it truly does is kind of mocks of the very real point where I say, I appreciate that your paycheck comes from your service, but your money is also coming from my money. And so how do you, George, justify having a job where you are taking taxpayer money if you're a libertarian? I can't have that. I can't ask you that question if I haven't built a relationship with you, because that question is inherently an attack on your being, on your identity. And so, having built a relationship with you via the podcast and you listening and knowing my intentions and why I'm saying that, but if I just started out the relationship between you and I, shoving my thumb in your eye, going, you're a bad person, there's no reason for us to even talk, I'm never going to even get to ask you that question.
Right, and there is a huge tension within myself, within a lot of other people, libertarian-leaning people within the military and that work for the government, of that struggle between, this is what I think the government's role should be, but this is what it currently is. Yeah. And so when you look at the kind of the way, now I'm not an anarcho-capitalist, right, and so I believe that we should still have a military. Now, if I was king for a day and could choose how our military is set up, I would do almost no active military and would have an operational guard that is able to kind of stand up and sit down, that would be ready to defend the nation and be ready to act if we needed, but wouldn't have the massive expense of a standing army. But so as
you would still need the logistics. You would still need
some people that work full time for it. But so as I have that tension within me, it's like, okay, right now the government has sucked up a massive amount of money and resources, and so there are no national defense jobs that aren't in the military. Mm-hmm. Now, if we lived in a totally libertarian society and there would be some sort of defense job that was private, okay, I would do that. But we don't have that option.
But we would still be paying for it with taxpayer money. Right.
Well,
that's to me is I love that what you're saying, because there's the scale, right? There's the scale of zero military, and then there's the scale of too much military.
Right.
What he's saying is all military is bad. All.
Right.
He's not saying, well, we should have, a little standing force that, like you said, that's voluntary, trained, everything else. He's saying, no, these guys are just a bunch of rapists and welfare, hoggers. And that's So you're not even opening the scale. You're just literally saying zero.
It's the intellectual level of conservatives going, well, I'm not even going to deal with the fact that he may or may not be a child molester. He's just not a Democrat.
Yeah, what we started with. Yeah, exactly.
He posted today, and I don't know if he deleted it or not, but he posted today that what government program would you end? And I just wrote, I would tear up all the streets outside of your house. So your list, before we go, I want to make sure, did you cover everything that you felt like you wanted to say?
For the most part, that last point was kind of the big one. That is a daily tension I feel of, okay, should I still be working full-time for the military? But it's more than, Doug talked about this a lot, that it's more than just a job. It's a community. Mm-hmm. And so, plus I have a contract. So it's not so simple as, we'll just pull out.
You didn't start there. You weren't born libertarian.
Right. Okay, if I just pull out, okay, I go to prison.
But we need his...
Is that what I need?
Right.
Is that what I want?
But just even what you were sharing here in this conversation, that knowledge needs to be passed on to the next guy that is doing the next 4 years.
Right.
And like, if we don't have that, if we don't, like, then we're idiots. That's where we go back to when our military was, practically wiped out and we couldn't respond to anything and we couldn't defend ourselves. And so that knowledge share has to go, and not just the knowledge share, right? The respect, I can't say enough good things about that side of it as well. There's a real pressure within the military just to be good human beings, and none of us join the military to go blow up people or, it's the most ridiculous thing ever.
Yeah. And so if I would get out, now there's a libertarian voice missing from every meeting that I previously sat in. Mm-hmm. And so, some people might mock that we change it from the inside, but how else are you going to change it? You going to change the military from the outside?
Right.
I doubt it.
Right.
And so, let's have as many liberty-minded people within the military trying to limit the waste, trying to limit the bad tactics, the bad policy.
Great point.
Because even as a lower-level commander, you still have a sphere of influence. When I go to my armory, I'm the guy. Mm-hmm. I'm the commander, and so what I say goes. And it's the same thing if I were to deploy, as a commander. When I get there, this is my sphere of influence, and we are going to do everything as best as we possibly can from a liberty-minded perspective and from a partnership-minded perspective of how can we solve the root of this problem. And so if you take out those sort of ideas and those sort of voices,
what are you left with?
You're just left with...
We need highly intelligent people in the military. We need libertarians in the military. We need balance in the military. You can't just say, well, all stupid.
Yeah, I mean that's from a mass marketing perspective. It's
suicide.
Right.
It's just stupid.
It's keeping the club small.
It's so ignorant. That's the thing is, my politics. I'm all over the place on stuff, and the fact is like. Listening to George is refreshing, because I totally respect his point of view. I respect your point of view. We argue all the time online, and that's the thing is I hate this world that we live in, where everything is absolutes and you're an evil, terrible, nasty person if you don't agree with me.
Right.
Because I didn't grow up where you grew up. I always tell people like, I have friends of mine that are definitely on the we need higher welfare and we need this and we need that. It drives me absolutely crazy. But the fact is I try to understand where they came from. What made them come to that belief system, that because their environment is what educated them to get them where they were. Mm-hmm. And the more that we understand each other, the less we hate each other. And that's just pure hate what he put out there. It's just nonsense. And again, I would love to see some facts. Like if he wants to call it a welfare program, we've got 100,000 veterans in central Indiana. 60,000 of them are registered with the VA. 40,000 veterans are walking around, many of them that should be collecting benefits. I think Matt Hall said over $1 billion a year worth of benefits are unpaid in Indiana.
In just Indiana.
In just central Indiana.
Right.
Yeah. $1 billion of federal money that could be, flowing through this stuff. And so when you sit there and say that, well, vets are just a bunch of, welfare mongers, how about the guy that died of asbestosis, a few years ago because he worked on a Navy boiler, his whole life, and did his kids aren't even going to, they're not even getting any money for that, and like, it's just disgusting. It's really just disgusting, and it's unproductive.
Yep. All right. So final thoughts for this episode, George. Go ahead, Doug. Doug first.
That's it. It was a great conversation, and I just want people, again, George said it from a intervention standpoint with, from a war standpoint, but we need that, on an American standpoint too, that if you really have these doubts about veterans and you really think it's as monstrous as you think it is, or red, like I snickered at one of the things that you were commenting out there, because of course a lot of the press that came out of the war zone was negative. Mm-hmm. Like, of course,
right?
They weren't going to tell the stories of valor and everything else. I went to this movie last night, and there was a kid that 2 weeks out of basic, or 2 weeks out of his training for medical, he went over there with the 101st, and some guys got in a firefight. 3 guys were caught in a triangulation and were shot. Three shot. This kid ran down the hill. Just said, "I'm going." Ran down the hill. He was 21 years old or something like that. Ran down the hill. Started bandaging him up, putting tourniquets on, everything else, and he gets shot. He gets shot and goes down. 2 more guys run down there. He's the medic that got shot. He's telling the 2 guys what to do to keep treating the other 2 guys. And in his last breath, he says, "I'm sorry." And that's the, who the hell wouldn't you respect, that with his last dying breath, his biggest thing was that he disappointed the guys around him, that he wasn't able to fix those guys. Like, holy shit.
Yeah. What's this movie called?
No Greater Love.
Okay.
It's nogreaterlovemovie.com. But and these guys want people to understand that. Like, take away the big picture of whether these are the right tactics, wrong tactics, or whatever. Go look at what kind of men these are that are taking care of, and women over there that are taking care of each other. These guys are fucking amazing.
How can people get a hold of you if they want to, Doug?
They can get a hold of me through my company's DK New Media downtown, and I'm at the Speakeasy above the Hard Rock Cafe, so they can always find me here.
George?
So kind of my final thought is more to people that are involved in their local or state or even national libertarian parties. Seek out the military. Don't, push us aside as, welfare queens. Seek us out, because, I came to it because of someone else that was in the military, another libertarian. And there's a lot more of us, or even far right-wing conservatives, that could easily be flipped to the Libertarian Party. Yeah. And so seek us out, engage with us, and use that to kind of help bolster your strength. Like it or not, a lot of the public will elevate our opinions over other citizens. So why not use a powerful military voice to push liberty forward rather than pushing us to the side? That's kind of my final thought on everything.
All right, cool. Well, thanks so much for both of you being here. I appreciate it very much. For my part, I just want to thank everybody who listens. If you found anything of value in this podcast, which I'm sure you did, because it was excellent to hear from these 2 gentlemen, then please share it and let people know that not all libertarians hate the military. I think it's important for us. So often, I think my audience specifically is a polite audience and a nice audience, and we get stuck in the middle, and that's why we're here. And we don't often want to take the uncomfortable route of defending one side or the other. And I'm a lot of times misunderstood because I'm a confusing person for people to follow. 1 minute, it seems like I'm a leftist. The next minute, it seems like I'm a conservative. The next minute, it seems like I'm crazy. So, and I just think that people need to speak up. If you have certain beliefs, if you, it's so easy for the Arvins of the world to go out and say that they hate soldiers, but it seems to be more uncomfortable for libertarians that don't hate veterans to stand up and say, that guy's wrong and I don't hate veterans. And it shouldn't be that way. And if you want to build the type of libertarian movement that you want, you've got to start speaking out. And I've spoken out about Arvin, and it's not something that I do because I don't really like to infight too much. But I think it's important for people to understand the distinction between these two ideologies within the libertarian movement of this flat, childish thinking versus being an adult and really engaging in the world in the way that it is, as opposed to the way that we want it to be. We can do both, and we can do both with respect. So thanks to Doug Karr, thanks to George for being here, and until then, I say be good to each other.
Thank you for listening to the We Are Libertarians Network. Get our other shows at WeareLibertarians.com.